Service Test Plus webinar. Hi, this is Sandeep from ManageEngine, and I'm excited to host this webinar. Some guidelines before we start off. At any point, if you have any questions, you can use the questions tab in the control panel to raise the questions, and all questions will be answered at the end of the webinar. And let's get right into today's topic. And today's topic is operational readiness, ensuring a smooth transition from project to production, by Rob England, IT Skeptic. Rob England is our today's guest speaker, and he's an IT commentator and a consultant. He's a blogger, coach, trainer, and a published author. He is best known for his controversial website and his alter ego, the IT Skeptic, at www.itskeptic.org. Rob, take it over.
Thank you, Sandeep, and hello everybody, and welcome again to the sixth in the series of webinars that I've been doing for ManageEngine. And this one today is one of my personal favorite topics, a bit of a hobby horse of mine. This is all about, as Sandeep said, ensuring that smooth transition from project to production. It's a topic that's mentioned widely in areas such as ITIL, but it's not something that gets the focus that I feel that sometimes it deserves. So I feel that operational readiness is something that ought to be a function and a practice and something specifically set up to manage this whole area, this whole issue, this whole concept of operational readiness, so that we don't get something that I call dead cat syndrome. As you see there is the subtitle of this, and we'll talk about that, what that is. There's so much that can go wrong if we don't think about operational readiness, and there's so many benefits that we'll derive if we do think about operational readiness. One of the key areas in ITIL that links to this is something called service validation and testing, which is a new practice, or as ITIL likes to say, process that's been introduced in ITIL version 3. And the benefits that ITIL talks about for service validation and testing are a reduction in the number of incidents generated. So you think about new systems or major upgrades to systems, to services rolling into production. If these systems aren't operationally ready, then what traditionally happens is that we generate this huge wave of incidents. So the service test phones suddenly start running hot because a system doesn't have, perhaps there hasn't been the proper training of users, and users are confused and wondering about what this new thing is, or the system's buggy, of course, and it's functionally broken. So for a number of reasons, as a new system is introduced into production, we can get this wave of incidents, of things that need to be dealt with. And closely related to that, of course, a wave of support calls. So remember, there's a subtle distinction here, because people could be ringing up just asking for advice and help as well. So there's an additional number of calls coming into the service desk that aren't, strictly speaking, incidents. So by ensuring a smooth transition from projects to production of new systems or upgrades to systems, we're hoping to see a reduction in the number of incidents and support calls that those new systems generate. And then consequent to that, behind that, we want to make sure that there's a reduction in the number of underlying problems and errors caused by the new systems, and hence all the costs that are incurred from the service desk activity and from fixing the underlying problems. And so consequent on that, we want to make sure there's not reputational damage from shaky new systems going into production, and all sorts of other losses and consequences that can flow from that. In addition to trying to reduce the impact of new systems coming out of projects, we want to optimize those new systems. So we want to make sure that new systems are well used. And this is an interesting aspect to projects, is that, and I'll talk about this a bit more in a minute, but project managers are tasked on delivering systems on time and on budget. And we're quite poor at making sure that there are KPIs around projects for the ongoing use and adoption of those systems, and the ongoing benefits and realization of value, and the ongoing total cost of ownership of systems. And we've got to get better at making sure that project managers and projects are measured on more than just on-time delivery and under-budget delivery. And so one of the big things that we want to optimize is the ongoing usage of the system. We want to make sure that people accept it, adopt it, and use it. And consequent to that, we want to see an increase in customer satisfaction. They like their new system. Flowing from that is an increase in IT staff morale. Nothing's more demoralizing to service desk people, to development people, and to operations people than new systems coming into production that don't work, or that have a negative impact, or that look bad. So smooth transitions make people feel good. And most of all, of course, we want to realize a proper return on the investment in the projects that we've been building. So there are all sorts of positive benefits, both in terms of reducing the impact and increasing the positive outcomes, if we can ensure a smooth transition from projects to production. And operational readiness is about ensuring that these systems are ready to work once they go live. Without proper operational readiness, then there are great risks associated with systems going live that are not what we would call operationally ready. One of those is the loss of IP. So, you're probably familiar with this syndrome, where projects are built by a team of either internal or external people, or a mix thereof, and the project team disbands. The contractors will disappear out of the organization, the internal people will go back to their day jobs, and if there isn't proper capture of their knowledge, of their IP, both in terms of documentation and in terms of transferring it, most importantly, to the heads of the operational people, then a lot of IP is lost to the organization about the new system, and the ongoing operation of that system becomes problematic. Another major impact, if we don't do operational readiness properly, is the cost impact on IT operations. So, a lot of the time the operational costs aren't budgeted within the project, and there's no allocation of ongoing OPEX to run a new system. And that's one big issue that needs to be dealt with, to make sure that there is actually money for the system once it goes live. But also there are all the hidden costs. Excuse me, I talked about the the wave of incident tickets and problem tickets that get generated when a new system goes live. If a system's crappy, that wave can be 10 times higher than with a good system, and nobody's budgeting that cost, the impact of a poor system, and there's usually no way for operations to claw that money back either. So without, operational readiness has a big cost control element for operations to it, to ensure that we minimize the cost of the new systems going live. Obviously, services are less stable if we don't do a good job with the transition, and I'm going to talk some more about the sort of things that can go wrong in our services. Support's unable to respond well if we don't do a good transition. Anyone on this call from service desks, and there'll be plenty of you given the audience, are well aware of this, the situation, the syndrome where a new service goes live and the service desk has been inadequately trained and prepared for that go live. And so the phones start ringing and the service desk don't know how to deal with the incidents that are coming out of that, and don't know how to provide the proper help and advice to the users who are, confused by this new system because they've been inadequately trained as well. So, it's very important to make sure that the training component of this transition is in place to make so that everybody knows what to do with the new system as it comes out. A more subtle one that's not thought about is that changes become higher risk changes if we don't do operational readiness properly. So if we don't have a system that's stable in the first place, if we don't have the IP that we need to understand how the system works, and if we don't have the procedures and the understanding of how to handle this system in the production environment, then the ongoing changes that we make to that system become riskier, and we're more likely to screw them up. And that problem is compounded by the fact that we're generating all these incidents out of the system because it's not a good one, and those incidents are starting to spawn a wave of changes to fix all the bugs and other problems that we're finding in the incidents. And so there's a multiplier effect there, and the whole change regime around a new system can become wildly unstable if we haven't done operational readiness properly. So therefore, there's a higher risk of operational failures, of course, because a lot of those stem from change. But others stem from other sources I'm going to talk about in just a minute. So, the whole overall stability of the system is really, really fundamentally based on operational readiness. And there is a consequent underlying risk of data loss that we'll talk about as well. So operational readiness can be seen primarily as risk mitigation, right? Think about that. It's all about controlling the risk of new systems as much as it is about optimizing the benefit, the value of new systems. So there's this phrase I use that seems to resonate with operational people quite a lot. They can identify with this strongly, which is dead cat syndrome. So a lot of people on this call may come from countries where you don't have a fenced backyard, but certainly you'll be familiar with the concept in countries that do, like mine. And in places where you have a fenced backyard, one of the sort of standing jokes is the terrible things that neighbours throw over the fence when they think no one is looking to get rid of them, like a dead cat. And so, sometimes operations feels like new systems, new services going into production appear over the fence like this dead cat lobbed from the developmental solutions side. And they're about as welcome as the dead cat, and operations are about as ready for them as a dead cat, and they're about as welcome as a dead cat. So this phrase sort of grew up of dead cat syndrome for these hideous systems that appear out of nowhere, that nobody wants and that don't work terribly well. So today I want to talk to you about 4 strategies for preventing dead cat syndrome. And those 4 strategies are the use of testing in a warranty period, operational robustness, organisational change, managing organisational change, and most of all, I think, communication strategies. Let's talk a little bit about testing. Even in the worst of situations, some testing goes on with new and upgraded systems. And ITIL talks about testing for utility and warranty of new systems. So utility, it's talking about both that they meet the functional requirements, they do what they're supposed to do, and that the system is reliable and reasonably bug-free and works and has certain levels of availability. And that's great. And the warranty side of things sort of implicitly implies that the system has a lot of the operational readiness attributes to it, but there's nothing, well, there's not, I think, anything sufficiently explicit in there. And I think that we need to explicitly test for operational acceptance as well. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later on, but quite a bit more about that later on. But I think we need to drive this concept that in addition to the utility and the basic, what ITIL calls warranty of the system, that we're testing specifically and explicitly for the operational aspects of the system, and that just as we have user acceptance testing to make sure that the users are happy with the system, we ought to be explicitly and formally testing for operational acceptance, because there's another major stakeholder here that gets left out a lot, and that's operations. And they ought to have their own formal say, just like the users do, in whether the system is really done and ready. And the key thing, I think, is a warranty period. So this is, ITIL has stolen the word warranty for utility and warranty, which kind of screws up the phrase warranty period, which is using warranty in a different sense. But this is the generally understood term that people out there can understand, right? Warranty period. ITIL calls it early life support, which I think is a monstrous phrase. It brings to mind images of people with tubes and wires coming out of them and machines going ping, and doesn't imply a terribly healthy system. So I don't like the phrase early life support, and I try to stick to the more generally accepted warranty period, even though we're now using warranty in two different ways. So work with me here. But so we want to have a warranty period. We want to have a transitional time after the system goes live where the project is still responsible for that system. Now we're getting better at this, and it's becoming quite common for projects to have a warranty period. But there's a couple of issues that come out of it. One of them is that projects have a finite amount of money, and so warranty periods tend to be a finite, explicitly defined period, like 1 month or 3 months. And if the system's still rubbish at the end of the warranty period, that doesn't matter. The project still disbands and goes away. So while the warranty period is good, there's still no onus on the project to ensure that the system, does meet all the standards at the end of that warranty period. They still have the option to run away. And there's also the reverse problem in some organizations where the warranty period never ends. And I'm sure you're probably familiar with scenarios of this, where the project is still supporting, or assorted people from the project are still supporting the system months or years after it's gone live. And the transition at the end of the warranty period doesn't happen properly. So I think it's important that we focus on the warranty period to make sure that we have one, to make sure that at the end the transition happens properly. And if I ruled the world, in a perfect world, I think the warranty period would be indefinite until the final operational and user sign-offs happen. The second strategy I want to talk about is a focus on operational robustness. So this is the thing that as I say, gets mentioned all over the place in things like ITIL, but doesn't have a good focus. There's an element of locking the stable door after the horse is bolted when we're doing operational readiness testing. We want to work back to the start of the life cycle and influence operational robustness, which is not an ITIL term, it's my term, right from the start. We want to make sure that how the system is designed and the standards that are used when we design our systems and how the system is built all involve thinking about the operational robustness of that system, all involve thinking about making sure that it's going to be reliable and able to be operated when it goes live. So there are things in here like scalability, which we do some scalability testing, but there are a lot of other implications to be thought about that don't happen in a lot of systems. A big area that I'm going to talk about more is operational procedures. So it's very common that this inadequate thought goes in during the design and build phase around how it's going to be operated and what the procedures are that need to happen. And the classic example here is around data. So I know of systems that went live and then slowly ground to a halt over a period of months because the database needed to be reorged and for performance, and that wasn't happening because nobody had designed a procedure to do database reorgs, let alone tell operations they needed to do it. Another one where a system ground to a halt because the database needed to be archived, but nobody had thought to put a procedure in place to do that. The developers were doing it on an ad hoc basis, but no one had built it into the system. So the database just got bigger and bigger and bigger until the system ground to a halt. Or another example where the backups weren't happening because everyone just assumed that operations would somehow automatically add the new system to all the backup regimes without any actual formal process to do that. So this is data is just one area, but it's one of the classic areas where developers can be quite cavalier about thinking about operational robustness of new systems. And so we need to make sure that that robustness flows right back to the standards and design and build phase and is not just something we're testing about. So part of that is non-functional requirements. So non-functional requirements is a phrase that developers are familiar with. In the development world, understand that there are the functional requirements, which is what the users want to see and the capabilities, and then there are the non-functional requirements, which are all the other stuff that the users aren't specifying or requiring, but we still need to be building into the system. And so all the operational readiness stuff that I'm talking about tends to fall in the non-functional requirements of the system. And so operational robustness, one of the main drivers for that is to ensure that the non-functional requirements are being defined in the system. Now, that's at the input end. The output end is another phrase, the operational acceptance criteria, which if we do what I'm saying and we get more formal about operational acceptance testing, we should define what the criteria are. What does the hole look like that you've got to poke the system through to get it into production? And then we should make sure that the non-functional requirements at the design end meet up with the operational acceptance criteria at the output end. And operational robustness is about that whole process of influencing the non-functional requirements at the front end and making sure that they align with the operational acceptance criteria at the back end. Now, if we do those two things, testing and warranty and designing for operational robustness, then now the cat's alive when it arrives in production. It might still be a bit of a mangy looking cat, but it's alive. So now the next two strategies, the focus on organisational change and managing organisational change and driving that through communications, how we get to something better than just a mangy cat. So organisational change is about that whole transition phase from development to production, and a lot of the things that ITIL talks about in the service transition book. Things like, I've already mentioned, the transfer of IP. So to make sure that this is, normally one of the best ways to do this, and one of the most common ways, is to make sure that operational people from IT operations and from the service desk are actually involved in the project and work on the project for some of the time to pick up this knowledge and help the transition, and then return them to the production teams. And then we also want to have more formal transfer of IP through documentation and supporting information and so on. Another big area to look at is SLAs, OLAs, and underpinning contracts. So SLAs are the agreements with the customer for the new system. So back at that non-functional requirements phase, we want to make sure that as a system is designed, as the requirements for the system are developed, operations need to be involved in the negotiation of the SLAs, the SLTs, the service level targets, with the customer. It's remarkable the number of projects that determine the SLA as part of the project without any operational involvement. And the first operations know about what service levels have been agreed is when the system starts trundling down the rails towards production. Or worse still, projects where there is no SLA and no one's even had the discussion with the customer until the system is trundling down the rails towards production. Then there are the OLAs, which are the internal agreements within IT and between IT groups and between departments in the organisation that back up the SLAs. And it's quite common that these don't exist at all as a system is heading towards production. And then there are the underpinning contracts, which are the agreements with the third-party providers, the vendors and the underpinning service providers. And it's also quite common that the project goes out and negotiates these contracts without any operational involvement. And it's not unusual for the underpinning contracts to not match up with the SLA. So we've committed one thing to the customer and we've not asked for that to flow through to their suppliers, which makes it pretty hard to deliver on the SLAs. So being involved in the whole SLA, OLA and underpinning contract process through the design and development of the system is important for operations, and making sure that they match up and meet up. Admin roles and procedures is another common area of issue. So, a new system's going in and there's all these administrative activities to be performed. So who's going to do database reorgs? Oh, operations are going to do that. Are they? Has anybody told operations? Has anybody talked to operations? The internal administrative functions within the system, there are lookup fields on a screen and we want to add another code to the lookup field for a different category of whatever the system administers. Who's going to add that lookup code? Oh, the business, the customer, the business department are going to do that. Are they? Do they have an administrator? Has anyone talked to them about the fact that they're going to be doing this stuff? So the whole racy chart stuff, the whole responsibilities and accountabilities and the work assignments and the procedures to do it, has it all been thrashed out? Is it clear who's going to administer the different aspects of the system, and have those people agreed that they are in fact going to take on those roles? Often really The other major area is communication. And I think this is, at the end of it all is the real essence of this thing, is about making sure that people talk to people, making sure that the development and project people are actively talking to the operational people. So at the end of the day, it's about people talking to people. At the end of the day, it's about the human aspects of this stuff. There's a tribal effect, right, in any group of humans. If you get somewhere between 20, 30, 50, 100, 150 people, there is a certain amount of, there's ultimately a point where that group of people will break into two tribes. It's called Dunbar's number, and different experts argue about what the actual number is, but the point is you get a big enough group of people and they'll break in two. Now I'm just going to go back for a minute because I gather we had an audio problem just before. I saw a couple of messages coming up. So I'll come back to this slide for a moment for those of you who might have missed some of the audio, to say we talked about transfer of IP, and I think you got that. But the administration roles and procedures is an important area to make sure that the right people within the business and within IT have thrashed out between them as to who's going to administer this thing after it goes live, who's going to add lookup codes to tables on screens, who's going to be doing the database administrative stuff. All of those areas, make sure that the RACI charts are in place, make sure that the roles are defined and accepted as to who's going to administer which bits of the new system, because that can be not well done. And the other area is escalation paths. To remember your ITIL theory about functional escalation and hierarchical escalation. Functional means, passing stuff around amongst ourselves to resolve it, and hierarchical means escalating up to bosses when things aren't happening. Making sure those paths have been defined and are documented and are thrashed out and are accepted before we go live. These are areas that are commonly not well done in systems and have a major impact on the operational robustness of the system after it goes live, and we end up thrashing around for months after it goes live before we get these things smooth, which shouldn't happen. And a lot of that comes down, as I say, to the fourth strategy, which is the fundamental one, which is communication. So, as I say, people are tribal, and if you get a big enough group, and most organizations are big enough, that it starts breaking into sub-tribes. And the classic, and it'll break along natural divisions that it wants to break along, and one of the classic divisions is between projects and development on one side and operations, production on the other. And so you're always going to get this tribal effect, and DevOps and things like that try and break it down and try and overcome that, and that's great. And I think in any environment we need to be communicating to try and break down that division. So the last area I really want to talk about is communications, because this is the fundamental part of operational readiness. And there's three aspects that I'll talk about: liaison, communication over service design, and project support. What we don't want to happen is this us and them tribal mentality, and this is a facetious diagram out of a satirical book that I wrote called Real ITSM. And this is what we don't want to arrive at, is where poor old development's turning up trying to poke new systems through the service porthole into the good ship production. And the whole role of operations is to be the department of no, is to be trying to obstruct that and make it as hard as possible to get new services into production. This is what it'll descend to. This is the worst case if we're not careful, and primarily if we don't talk, if we don't communicate. So we don't want IT operations to perform solely a gatekeeping role, to be sitting there waiting for the developers to arrive to try and get their systems in. That's not how it should work. So we want to be positive about this. We want to have liaison in place, and I facetiously again call it an outreach program. It's operations responsibility to drive and initiate the talking. It's operations, it's productions, it's service delivery's responsibility to initiate and drive the conversation with development and projects. Operations should establish liaison relationships with architects and the people setting the standards, and with the project teams and with the development groups. And these are very often dysfunctional, and it's up to us to because I'm assuming most of the people on this call, or a lot of people on this call, are actually from the operational side of the camp. It's up to us in operations, production, service delivery, service support to initiate that conversation, to create the liaison function, and to reach out to the architects and the designers and the developers to educate them about the operational requirements, so education. It's up to us to influence the design standards to get all those non-functional requirements in the standards from day one. And it's up to us to be actively involved in reviewing projects at an early stage to get agreement on the operational design. So a liaison function is essential to communications, and I think this should be a formal thing. It should be the operational readiness function within IT operations, whose role is to go out and talk to the projects, talk to the development groups, talk to the architects, and get this stuff happening. The second big communication area is as the service is actually being designed. The design process, operations needs to be actively involved in the design process. This means that operations ought to have people who are the design experts, who are the ones who are available as a resource and are called on and go out and actively get involved in the design of new systems. To help with designing the non-functional bits. And those same people are the ones who are out talking to the architects to get the standards improved, to get the stuff in the standard before the system even starts to be designed. And talking to the PMO to get the stuff in the project templates before the project even gets initiated, so that all those non-functional design steps are in the project templates. So we want to have people who are design people in operations. And finally, project support. You know, there's the old joke that the worst thing you can possibly hear is, "Hi, I'm here from the government and I'm here to help you." Well, in the same way, you know, "Hi, I'm from operations and I'm here to help you." We need to put effort into actively helping projects. It's not good enough to just leave projects out there in the wilderness and wait till they come stumbling up a week or a month before go live with the system and go, "No, that's not good enough." We need to be actively providing support. "Hi, I'm from operations and I'm here to help you. You know, I've heard you've had a couple of design meetings and you haven't even talked to us yet. Hi, I'm here. What can we do to help?" So we coach the projects on what they need to have for a smooth transition into production. And if we have to, then we start kicking down doors to say, why aren't you talking to us? We're here to help. Ultimately, it's about project persuasion. This is a people issue, not a process one. It's about getting along to the project meetings, especially in the early days, and especially in the projects that make you nervous. Explain why we need this stuff so that they understand why it's so important. Talking about realization of value, successful outcomes for the customer, reputational damage, total cost of ownership, and so on. Explaining these issues to the group, explaining how important it is that how a lot of it is just around documentation and thinking, and a lot of it isn't actually built into the code. You're not actually building a greater task for them in the actual system they're building, but there's a lot of thought needs to go on around that, making them understand that, and explaining what happens if it isn't there. It doesn't hurt to have a head on a pike. It doesn't hurt to have one unsuccessful project that you can point to say, look, this is what happens when you don't think about operational readiness, because project managers want that smooth transition, and if they can see what happens when they don't deal with operational readiness, then they'll be very ready to work with you. So we're about, the whole communication thing is about project persuasion. So there you go. 4 strategies for preventing dead cat syndrome. Have a warranty period, testing, operational acceptance testing, and a warranty period. The whole concept around designing for operational robustness, getting that thinking baked in and built in from standards through design and development. The management of the organisational change, managing the transition from doing a better job of managing the transition from development to production with all the transfer of IP and so on. And most of all, communication. And I'll hammer this point again. It's operations job, it's production's job, it's service delivery job as the recipients of the system to own and drive the communication back into the projects, the developers, the architects, to make sure that the communication is happening right from the start, that there's close collaboration, there's no surprises, the systems are good, and we're not getting dead cat syndrome, because we want to have a healthy cat arriving in production. Nobody deserves a dead cat. There we go. Thank you. I hope that was of interest to you.
Thanks a lot for the wonderful presentation. We have one question here. Yeah, here it goes. How do you get management sponsorship for non-functional requirements? Without it, you run the risk of having them removed from the project due to cost issues.
Yeah, how do you get management buy-in for that? I actually think it's pretty easy. You know, the best way to get management buy-in for anything is to have a disaster. So, you know, once something goes wrong, that's the time to leap in and say, here's how we prevent that happening again. So that's your opportunity if it comes. But whether that opportunity comes or not, I mean, it's all about return on investment. So, you know, the argument with management is you're sinking all this money in this system. Why would you not want that system to work after it goes live? You know, it's not about, you know, new systems is not about finishing the project on budget. Comes back to what I said at the start about that. That's the wrong metric. You know, new systems are about realizing a return on our investment and maximizing a return on our investment and maximizing customer outcome and customer satisfaction. And you know, and that's what we should be focusing on. And in order to achieve that, the completion of the project is only one part of it, and the budget of the project is only one part of it. It's the total cost of ownership over time, and it's the quality and reliability and value of the system throughout its whole life cycle. This is where project portfolio management and program portfolio management is actually fundamentally wrong. And this is why ITIL talks about service portfolio management. If we don't wrap our project portfolios and our program portfolios inside a service portfolio that thinks about the whole life cycle, not just the build phase but the run phase as well, and looks at maximizing the value and the return over that whole service life cycle, then we get this myopic focus where people are just looking at the cost of the project and are cutting things out of the project. But if we can talk to management and say it's about the overall return on investment, it's about sinking all this money into the project and then making sure we get the value back afterwards. If you have that conversation with them, then hopefully they can see that these things we're trying to do are about maximizing return on investment. I hope that answers your question.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Rob. And we have another question here. How do you convince developers that this isn't just a bureaucratic overhead?
Yeah, that's a good one too. So getting the acceptance of the developers. Look, I think that comes back to the communication thing again. If operations are just sitting there, as I say, being the department of no, sitting behind their gate, saying, nope, it's not good enough, try again, then you'll get negative reaction from developers. But if you're actually walking down the hall, getting in the lift to the other floor, getting in the taxi to the other building, and talking to the development teams and sitting down with them and saying to them, look, first of all, this is about a smooth transition for your project and you looking good. So hit the what's in it for me and say, look, developers, you want the system to go live smoothly on day one. You don't want glitches. You don't want reputational damage. You want a smooth transition, and especially talk to the project manager about that, because all project managers want to see a smooth transition to production. If you have that conversation about, hey, you want this to look good, and if you have the big picture conversation about it's about the customers, it's about the business, we're all working for the business, we want to maximize return on investment, we want to get value out of the system you are building, the big picture thing. And then the third one is, once you start establishing a relationship with them, is the, hey, be nice to me, guys. I'm the one who's going to own this after it goes live. Help me out here. So you've got 3 buttons you can push with the developers. What's in it for them, the overall benefits to the business, and then the, hey, think about me. I'm the one who's going to own this. If you hit those buttons with them, then hopefully they see that you're not just, if you're explaining why you're doing this stuff, the rationale behind it, that they won't see it as a bureaucratic imposition.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. I hope that answers your question. And that's all for today. We have no other questions over here. And thank you, Rob, for your interesting presentation, and thank you, audience, for your kind patience over here. And the recorded webinar and the presentation will be available shortly in servicedeskplus.com/webinars. You can also follow us in Twitter at twitter.com/servicedeskplus and on Facebook at facebook.com/ManageEngine. Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.